Fine-looking crowd tonight. I'm going to be sweating like a mick up here, and you guys are going to be sitting out there all comfortable. Y'all feel bad now? No? There you go. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Gary. Glad to be here, glad to be sober. My home group is the Parker Group. They named it that in about 1969. I got to that group, moved there to Parker in 1998, and I didn't see any good reason to change it. My sobriety date is the longest day of the year, June 21st, 1983. I just celebrated 30 years. I've had good sponsorship. I've had a wonderful experience as a result of my association with Alcoholics Anonymous. And part of the exercise is to share some of that experience with you tonight. It was a hot day in June 1976. I stumbled into the back door of a high-class drinking establishment in eastern Montana, a place called Heiser's Bar Grill and Roasted Chicken Inn. They used to sell a t-shirt that said liquor up front, poker in the rear. It takes a minute for that one to kind of set you there, doesn't it? They sold packaged goods up front and they had a little card game in the back. Does that help? Are there any alcoholics in the room tonight? Okay, I was kind of wondering there. And it was Sunday morning, and on Sunday it was illegal in Montana to sell liquor. But I knew the group song, and so I got in the back door, and as I stumbled in the back door, out walked the town drunk. His name was Blackie. And Blackie looked like an alcoholic ought to look. He was wearing a pair of old coveralls, shoes that didn't match, a corduroy jacket that the elbows were completely gone in, and he was holding a bottle of black velvet in his arms, cradling it like a baby. I said, Blackie, where are you going with the whiskey? He said, I got an AA meeting at 2 o'clock. I got to get sober. Now, I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was a controlled drinking society, and Blackie obviously was the group project. And it wasn't working real good for him. And that was the first time in my life I ever heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll never forget, that day I told myself, if I ever get that bad, I'm going to check this controlled drinking deal out. Now, Blackie was a real alcoholic. He lived in a 1951 Cadillac that had a camper welded in the back seat. It didn't run, so they towed it from bar parking lot to bar parking lot every 30 days to beat the vagrancy laws. Blackie never worked. All he did was drink and hustle. Drink and hustle. That's all he ever did. And that's what my impression of an alcoholic was, coming to you people. We call them our personal adventures before. Now, we will take the worst possible circumstance, dress it up, and try to make it look pretty. My personal adventures before should be called a police blotter. But we call them personal adventures. Personal adventures before and after. God, we just dress it all up. Anyway, my drinking story started at the age of 12. Half a dozen little weenies and myself, I don't even think our voices had changed, bought 2 half-gallons of pop-off vodka, had to pay the vig, you know, and we loaded that up and rode our little bicycles out to this hill up in northwestern Wyoming where I grew up, and we started drinking. Now, those guys just went out on the business of being successful. Hell, they just went to college and got a degree in something approaching 4 years and something meaningful. They got married once, had 2.2 kids and a dog, and worked 30 years for some outfit that had reputation, and retired. I'd love to stand up here tonight and tell you that that's what happened to me, but that's not what happened to me. My life took a turn. Alcohol affected me differently than it did those guys. They would take a drink of it and they'd spit it out and they'd complain about the taste of it or what it was doing to their throat, or some little weeniness like that. Me, I drank all I could get, spent 3 days running around out there talking in the unknown tongue. When I got home, I was in more trouble than a kid could ever be in, and I answered those complaints by running away from home. And I started that pattern when I was 12 years old. I started running away from home. I'd end up on the mean streets in Denver, and be running around down there, and then there'd always be some guy, the fuzz we used to call it in those days, the fuzz. The fuzz would show up, and they'd say, Gary, it's time to come home. And they'd load me up in a car and haul my country ass back to Wyoming, and I'd face more trouble than I could be in, possibly, and I'd run away from home again. And it just was a cycle like that my whole life growing up. As a young man, a young teenager, I started working for a living. I was still going to school, obviously, but I was a high overhead kind of a guy, and so I needed a little income. And so I started working for people, older guys mostly, and they didn't think anything about drinking on the job. And I say all this to say that I learned how to function while drinking. And I think in the earliest times of my drinking, I didn't black out all the time, but I certainly had it often enough to raise some alarm bells and the folks that were around me. And but for the most part, I drank pretty much all day long. It wasn't until later I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that somebody said, "Oh, well, that's a continuous drinking." What do they call it? Maintenance drinking, I guess. It didn't seem like I was maintaining everything. I was trying to improve on perfect. Some of you might remember that first time you got that flush, that sense of euphoria and that sense that, my God, this is better than breathing in and out. And that's what happened to me, and I spent the rest of my life trying to recapture those moments. Never came close. If I did, it was for 28 seconds. So I decided happiness is 28 seconds. That's about how long it lasts. And it kills me in AA that how many of us will sell out for happy. It doesn't last long enough to worry about, folks. Joy, on the other hand, seems to be a lasting thing. And so if we would aim for joy as a part of our sobriety and our recovery, I think we'd be more to hitting the mark than selling out for happy. But it was many years to go before I was to understand that at all. I was sitting there watching TV one night, and she came up to me and said, "I'm pregnant." I have no idea how that happened. Seemed to me like we were just watching TV. And so we did the thing, we got married. She was my high school sweetheart. And in 4 years, I taught that woman how to hate me. And I taught that woman how to be scared to death of me. And I taught that woman how to want to get the hell away from me, which she ultimately did. By this time, I had 2 children, a boy and a girl. She took those kids out of that home, did the only sane thing she could do, and take them to Colorado. This started a very interesting time of my life. I had a little incident. A cop pulled me over one night in my hometown, and there was a kid I'd gone to school with, a couple of years older than I. He was a bully. He used to steal my lunch money when I was a kid. Then they put a badge on him. Well, he decided to pull me over because I clearly was on the wrong side of the street. I'd already wiped out about 6 cars on the driver's side, and there was just little fender parts hanging off my car. And I pulled over, and he said, "Get out of the car. I want you to do the roadside sobriety test." I said, "I'm so drunk I can't even feel my legs. Just take me to jail." And he insisted, so I rolled out of there like a big old blob. Remember that movie in the 50s, The Blob? That's kind of what I looked like falling out of that car. And I got a hold of the fender, got up, took 2 steps, fell down, and he did a very unfortunate thing. He started laughing at me. And I drew a quick sober spell there for about 18 seconds. I put a couple of moves on him and took his gun away from him and his club, and I handcuffed him to the center post of his car. And for good measure, I pulled his pants down and tied him around his ankles. and developed a powerful thirst as a consequence. So I headed back down to the bar. That's where the whole life was, you know. Regaled them in tales of daring do. And the next morning, the welcome wagon showed up at my now. To give you an idea of the nature of my success, I was living above a plumbing shop on the second floor in a 2-room walk-up that didn't have running water. Yeah. Anyway, the welcome wagon showed up, and it consisted of my dad, who was on the town council, the mayor, and the chief of police. And they had informed me that I had 24 hours to load them up and clear out, which was a good thing because I was already obviously in more trouble than you could be in. It turns out that guy was kind of hung up in a bad way there on Main Street. 2 other cops passed him that night and did nothing. So it was necessary for me to move, and that was fine. And I moved, in the next 4 years, I moved 27 times. And I was chasing rigs up in eastern Montana and western North Dakota. By this time, I'd started on a career in the oil and gas industry, a career which I still am gainfully employed in to this day, 39 years later. But in those days, you drank on the job. Or at least I didn't see it in the policy manual that you did, but it looked to me like that's what everybody else was doing, so I certainly did. And in fact, the interview question for one of those companies was, how do you handle your liquor? And I lied and said, pretty good. And they said, you'll need it. And I hadn't been there very long. And they gave me a stack of credit cards and a 1970 Ford LTD, big old boat with a couple of twin whip antennae on it. Man, I was styling and profiling. And I'm driving down the road and I'm selling stuff I don't even know what we make. But I understand the art of the deal is to separate them from their money, and so that's what I started out doing. And I actually became fairly successful at it. And I had moved to North Dakota during one of these adventures, and I ended up taking a division up there. They made me the sales manager in charge of it. That's what they do with people like us. We don't know what else. We have potential, you know, but God, they're just waiting for it to bear fruit, you know what I mean? And so that division went from last to first in the company, and in 1978 I won what they called the National Sales Award. And all I had to do was go to Houston, Texas, and pick up this award on a Saturday. Just show up. That's all I had to do. Well, I didn't want to be late, so I showed up on Thursday. And I put on my powder blue silk western suit. Fine suit. God damn, everybody needs one of those. And I had an Edsel hubcap belt buckle, you know, bigger than a man down there. Silver tip boots. God, I looked like the rhinestone cowboy. Tooled on down to the piano bar at the Holiday Inn out there on West Loop and got hooked up with a gin drinker. I want to just share one observation right now. There's something wrong with gin alcoholics. Those people are not to be trusted. Anybody that would drink crap like that, real potty mouse, inevitably somebody will come up and say, hey, gin drinker, buddy, you know, you're welcome. So anyway, I got hooked up with this gin drinker, and suddenly I find myself on Saturday morning down under the docks on Skid Row in Houston, Texas, drinking night train wine at room temperature, which in Houston was about 90, with a bunch of winos. And I still got that blue suit on, but it don't look like no blue suit no more. And I persuaded a taxi driver to take me. He said, I didn't even know where I was. Persuaded him to take me back to where I thought I came from, and it turned out it was about 10 minutes before I was scheduled to receive this award. Everything I say after this is hearsay. They said later You went to the podium looking disheveled, said something in an unknown tongue, and collapsed at the podium. Many years later, I read in a doctor's opinion, these people took a drink when circumstances were entirely favorable to them, and to pull the whole thing down over their ears. Huh? Well, that's what I did, and that wasn't the only time I did that, but that's one of the more glaring examples in my personal adventures. And my reward for that little episode was they shipped me to the Highline Highway, US 2, Williston, North Dakota. My God, that's where they put everybody when they didn't know what else to do with you. And I went up there and I joined some guys that were worse than me, if you can believe that. But guess what? We turned that division around from last to first, and guess what? I was up for the National Sales Award again the next year. They decided to discontinue giving the National Sales Award. Ingrates. So I made a big speech. We like big speeches. I made a big speech, called them on the phone, real manly. Told them I was going to drag up, done with their outfit, blah, 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 blah. Ended up back in Wyoming. And the last 5 years that I drank, I began to suffer horribly physically, the manifestations of alcoholism. I developed a condition they called in the old days, they used to call it Jake leg. Today they have a pretty word for it, it's called alcoholic neuropathy. But I'd gotten some bad booze in Oklahoma, I ended up drinking some moonshine that wasn't quite moon or shine. And it turned out it was rubbing alcohol. And I did a lot of nerve damage to my legs as a result of that and several other incidents like it. I developed, was in the beginning stages of renal failure, and I developed a condition they don't see much of today. It's called wine sores. Some of you might know what that is. They're like ringworm maybe, all over your body, and they bleed openly, and I developed that condition as well. Somewhere during my personal adventures, I perforated my esophagus and damn near bled out. And they saved my life, but it didn't heal right, and so I constantly bled at the mouth, and it was very difficult for me to swallow. And so oftentimes, in order to maintain a level of alcohol in my system, I would take a shot or two of Everclear, put it in my mouth and let it soak through my tongue because I couldn't swallow it. And that's the condition I found myself in. On the morning of the 20th day of June 1983, I came to, I'd been laying out in the sun underneath my pickup for about 2 days, near as I can tell. I got back in that truck. The only thing that would have anything to do with me anymore was a dog. And that dog was licking my face. And I'm convinced to this day that if that dog hadn't licked my face, I'd have died of exposure out there. I managed to retrace my steps by following my tracks. It turned out I was 50 miles from anything breathing air. And I ended up at a place that I'd been kicked out of over some kind of frivolous crap. And the guy saw me and took one look at me and knew that if he didn't give me a drink, I'd likely die right there on the stoop of that bar. So he did the honorable thing. He put me in the corner, told me, he said, "Shut up, don't talk to anybody. God almighty, we'll keep you going here. Don't talk to the paying customers." I got told that a lot when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous too. Shut up and don't say nothing to nobody. We clearly know you're new. That day, I continued to drink for some period of time, don't know how long. And I got to look back and tell you that this particular event was not all that bad compared to some I'd been on. But I saw myself in that mirror for the 10,000th time. And that one time I saw myself, I think, for the truth of my existence, not for the hopes and dreams of a lifetime, not for all the potential, not for all of the things that people had been saying to me, not for all of the people that had loved me, and in these days were doing nothing but crying around me. Everybody that knew me, everybody that loved me, I had driven them all away, and they did nothing but cry. I had made an absolute wreck out of my life in every department. I was a failure as a father, as a man, as a husband, as an employee, as a son, in every department. And I knew it. And I guess that's the only thing that's different that day, is that for the first time, I think, I saw myself in the truth of my existence. And what was looking back at me that day was a dead man. I was living on pure animal instinct. I had no capability of maintaining any kind of conversation with anybody. I had no emotional attachment, no emotional response really to anything. And most days when I came to, I would say to myself, the first thought was, my God, I survived another day. And I turned at that moment to a God that I had walked away from at the age of 15. And I said, God, if there is a God, please help me. Don't let me live like this one more day, because I can't take it. And nothing happened. I didn't get struck dead. I didn't get struck sober. I didn't get lifted out of there on angel wings. Nothing happened. And so I drifted off into that fog one more time, the arms of Morpheus. And I continued to drink for several hours, I don't know how long. And I left, and I had not been home for 30 days. Been on a running drunk that started Memorial Day weekend. And that was not unusual, not unusual. I didn't understand the truth of alcohol, but one day in my life, probably 5 or 6 years before I was able to stop, I discovered that alcoholism and alcohol cause the shakes, but they cure the shakes. They cause the wreck, but they make the wreck go away. Alcohol causes and it cures. And that was my truth. And from that moment on, I was screwed, blued, and tattooed in the drinking department, though it was to be a while before I understood that. And I left there, and I started heading back to that house where I was getting mail. And that thought occurred to me to call Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know where that thought came from. As I stand here tonight, I believe in my heart of hearts that that thought was divinely inspired, and that my spoken prayer was answered that night. But it was to be a long time, was to go by before I was to understand that. I reached that place where I was getting my mail. I had, by this time, captured what's-her-name number 2. I think she was just hanging in there to see how the story would turn out. And I remembered somewhere in this last adventure that I saw an ad that said, if you want to drink, that's your business. If you want to stop, that's ours. And call this number. And I searched frantically for that ad, but apparently your seventh tradition was down a little bit, and you pulled the ad. Thank you. Great starters, bad finishers. In Alcoholics Anonymous, huh? So now I've got an obsession of the mind. I'm going to find you damn people, not even knowing who you were. And I called anybody and everybody that I thought might know something about Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a hold of a preacher who had been out at the house. He and my wife had been praying for my soul. And I stumbled in from one of my running drunks, and I said, how's that working for you? And he said, we don't know. He said, what can we do for you? And I said, get the hell out of my house. That's the good thing to do. And so I called that guy. He hung up on me, not surprisingly. I called a doctor that I had seen who insisted that I was in a case of arrested development in the anal stage. He didn't understand alcoholism. They had hospitalized me at one point 6 times in 3 months for acute alcohol poisoning. And the last thing he told me, the 6th time they discharged me, hey kid, maybe you ought to stick with beer. So that was the medical estimate of my situation. I called a deacon with the church that I had been going to some church because She wanted to be baptized, and I was trying to be supportive, whatever that means. And I would get thirsty, and I'd leave the church and go out and find that old jug under the seat and take a drink, go back in there. Sometimes that's the only way you can take church. Any alcoholics in the room? So they had led a contingent of men from that church over to my house one night, captured me, and they were fixing to lay the hands on me and pray me well. Now, I don't know what that does for you, but it makes me thirsty. I escaped their clutches and ran away. And that's what I knew how to do. I ran away from everything. Well, now I'm looking down the barrel of death for sure. And finally, I got a hold of a deputy sheriff who apparently I'd had some little run-in with, something, I peed on his shoes, or I don't remember what he said it was. And I said, you know anybody that's connected with Alcoholics Anonymous? It just so happens, and thank God for the CPC efforts that we do. One of our members had taken his card and stuck it up next to the sheriff's dispatcher's phone number and said, if anybody calls in and wants to stop drinking, have them to call me. And the sheriff was sitting right by the dispatcher's table, looked up and saw that card, said, I know somebody's connected with that outfit. I'll have them to call you. Don't you run away. Now, all of that I just previously described serves no purpose whatsoever except to emphasize the most important thing that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the 12-step call, 12-step work. That's the only reason we're here. Yeah, we're going to have a big time. Yeah, we're going to dance tonight. You know, dancing's just a prelude to good sex. I know it's hot out there. I mean, I get it. I've been accused of having some funny ideas about things. The most important thing that we do is 12-step work. Working one-on-one. The forward to the 3rd edition of the book says each day, recovery begins when one liar shares the truth with another liar. That's what we are. 2 liars sorting out the truth. That's all we do here. First liar ain't got a chance here. Oh, you think you're so honest. Yeah. Let's see. And so that guy called me. He said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is John. I understand you want to do something about your drinking, boy. I said, I don't think there is anything I can do about my drinking. He said, are you drunk? And I said, yes, sir. He said, it doesn't do us much good to talk to wet drunks. And I said, I ain't wet my pants all day. And that was a good day for me. He said, you got anybody there? I said, yes. What's her name's here? Put her on the phone. Put her on the phone. They start that nodding, shaking their head, saying no a whole lot. A little bit later, she gives me the phone. And he said, he said, I'll tell you what, try not to take the drink tonight. If you got to take the drink, take the drink. But try not to take the drink. I'll talk to you in the morning. So I hung up the phone. And she said, they're telling me you ought to go to bed, which I thought was a good idea. I hadn't been to bed in probably a month at least at that point. I used to sleep sitting up in the car because sometimes or the pickup, because sometimes you'd have to move pretty fast. Like if you're not parked where you're supposed to, and things like that. I got picked up 34 times for public intoxication the last year I drank. 34 times. And they would put me in the drunk tank, and I would thank God the nights that I was there by myself. When I read in Bill's story that hydrotherapy helped much, the Washakie County Jail, Worland, Wyoming, their idea of hydrotherapy was a fire hose at 6 a.m. And they would clean you up. And it didn't matter if it was 100 degrees outside or 40 below, they would send you out at 6:05. Clothes soaked to the bone, frozen as fast as you could get across the street. Hydrotherapy did not help me much. I don't know how much suffering and experimentation and humiliation and condescension we have to endure before we get it. But I know this, I began to get it that night. She said, they're telling me I need to give you some Gatorade and honey, and they mixed it up on the stove, put it in me at about 130 degrees. She took a great deal of pleasure in that activity. It's like swallowing a branding iron, but it'll kill everything big enough to die down there. And for the first time in many, many months, I slept soundly, and that is unexplainable. And upon awakening, he did his job. He called me, and he said, did you take the drink? And I said, no, sir. He said, well, I got to go to work. I said, you people work? Blackie never turned a tap. I never saw that guy turn a tap. He never did nothing. He said, yeah, I work. I'll see you at the coffee shop at 3:30. Try not to take the drink. If you got to take the drink, God, he went on with that thing. And I said, John, I don't know you. He said, don't worry, kid, I'll know you. I failed to observe that. And at 3:30 that afternoon, in came, guess what? A gin drinker. Fundamentally untrustworthy. Name was John. His personal adventures had involved a telephone pole at one time. And they had taken his eye and taken it from where it was supposed to be and put it down on his cheek. God, he was the ugliest member of Alcoholics Anonymous I've ever met. That was the best they had for their prize pupil. That was a pathetic showing, which I reported to the group later, but after I could string words together. And by this time, I'd been sober for about maybe 8 hours without a drink. And I had begun to develop a set and series of very serious questions. The outcome of this whole endeavor was going to hinge on whether he answered these questions right or wrong. First question was, how much does it cost? He said, nothing. I said, who's in charge? He said, nobody. I said, what church is hooked to it? He said, none. Now, what does that sound like to you? It's a nut deal. But he was a good fisherman. He put the bait on the hook, he dropped it in the water, and I'm ready to swallow the bait. Okay, and I asked the critical question. Tell me about it. Now, he didn't start out telling me about his personal adventures. He started telling me this unbelievable story about a lying, whacked out stock flogger by the name of Wilson and this preaching proctologist working in the right area, I guess, for us, named Smith, who, it seemed to him, found this thing by accident. And it seems to me today that this thing started by accident. That nothing they did in the beginning especially was purposeful. We did more and learned more by mistake than we ever did on purpose, especially in our formative years. But it was to be a while before I understood all that. And he told me the story, and it was an unbelievable story. And you know what impressed me? And I don't impress easy. You know what impressed me? These cats didn't drink any better than I did. They didn't drink any better than I did. And it wasn't some do-gooder deal. God love them. God love the people that are trying to help us. But they were killing me. Because nobody understood what the hell I was up against. You cannot get this by reading a book. You've either walked a mile in the moccasins or you haven't. And there is no amount of education that's ever going to make somebody understand who hasn't been there. But these guys had been there. And they started this thing. One drunk helping another. one liar talking to another liar, sorting out the truth. And that's what we do. And that's AA at its heart and soul. The meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, the district, the structure, the General Service Conference, our intergroups, central offices, night watch phones, publications, literature, all that stuff exists to support that single activity. Two liars sorting out the truth. Two people sitting down over a coffee table and sharing their experience, strength, and hope with each other. One-on-one, small groups, very intimately. AA works best, real intimate. I doubt very seriously whether anybody's going to really get honest in a room full of 200 people. But I know this, that when you suffer enough and you're with the one that you're opposite, you will tell the truth eventually. My experience is it happens about 2:30 in the morning after you warn them out. They'll confess to anything at that point. Okay, I'm sleeping with my boss's wife. Whatever it is, you know. I said, all right, what do you guys do? So we talked a little bit more. He told me quite a bit of his story. I mean, God, it was just like he was reading my mail. God almighty, I mean, he was talking about things that I swore to God I was never going to tell anybody. That damn Jake leg would tear me up. I mean, I'd be walking out of the post office, and suddenly my legs would completely go out from underneath me, and I'd collapse. It's hard to look good crawling down the street at 10 a.m. Hey, how you doing, Fred? A little difficult. He said, well, we have a lot of meetings, and we share experience, strength, and hope with each other at these meetings. We don't have a meeting in this town. Most of those towns had one meeting a week. But there's a meeting about 70 miles away. We'll come pick you up at 7, take you up there for the meeting at 8 o'clock. I thought, well, good, I've been in recovery all day. I could plan some kind of an escape route, because what's happening to me? What's happening to me is I'm starting to feel better in spite of everything. I'm starting to feel better, and that's a dangerous time for me. And my pattern is, after 2 or 3 days of feeling better, the world comes in on me, and I can't take it anymore. So if you're one of these people that stops drinking and your life gets better, good for you. You're to be commended. My life gets worse when I stop drinking. Everything becomes impossible for me. And little did I realize that Alcoholics Anonymous was a way of life, a manner of living. But I didn't understand that at that time. So anyway, he came to my house. He told me the first lie. He said he'd be there at 7. He came at 6. And my legs had quit working one more time, foiled my escape plan. He took me to, and he brought a Bubba with him, bigger than me. Guy's name was Carl. And he's apparently there's something in the literature that says when you got a big one, bring 2. I don't know what the hell. And I thought it was going to be some kind of ambulance. It turns out it was a cop car that he'd paid $150 for and was probably making payments. But it had newcomer locks. So they latched me in the back end of this jalopy, snapped the newcomer lock shut, tore down the road at way better than 75 miles an hour, playing classical music in an 8-track player that kept double tracking, that kept shoving the matchbook in there. Remember that? Oh, yeah. God. And I'm thinking, what have I gotten myself into? They took me to this meeting. South Bighorn Group, Basin, Wyoming, June 21st, 1983, 8:05 p.m. Act 1, Scene 1. Shaky Dick. This is openers. I'm Shaky Dick. And since I've come to A&A, I've damn near quit shaking. That was the best he had. And we're worried about what gets said in meetings. God, that was a pathetic effort. Okay, I don't know what your story is. I know what mine is, I'm pretty sure. At about 8:35 that night, I was home. Those guys just knew, they knew the suffering and the drinking game from what I had described to you. But more importantly, they knew the other side of it. They knew something about this thing from a place that I had no experience with. And it was just too good to be true. It was too good to be true. And so that was the day of my first AA meeting, and that was the day of my first day of sobriety, and that was the day after what I hope and pray to God every day was my last drink. I don't know how it worked in your life. I don't know how you come from A to B. All I knew was, for the first time in my life, I was with my people. You absolutely got it. You absolutely understood. You didn't criticize me. You didn't say, geez, kid, you stink. Look at them sores all over you. You saw my condition in my throat. And the group passed a rule that night. I thought it was personally punitive. Newcomers have to have 90 days to share in the group. I thought they were doing it at me, and it turns out they were. But the reason they did it was, of course, they always have to tell the truth at some point. You just got to wait them out. Said, Gary, we knew your condition of your throat. When you start talking, and if you get agitated, which it seemed to us is all the time, you start spraying a fine mist of blood out. And it's pretty disgusting. Now, we have a belief that the humiliation is over once you come to AA. So we don't want you talking and further humiliating yourself. And it was a good deal. Of course, I saved up, and at day 93, they asked me to chair the meeting, and I'd never talked in it. Oh, my God. I spent 45 minutes taking their inventory. I told every one of them what was wrong with them. The gin drinkers pointed them out, the winos, you know, and then they all sobered up when Ike was president or something. And I was convinced some of them weren't alcoholic and pointed that out. And you didn't understand the 1983 model alcoholic. We have issues, you know, and all this and that and the other thing. A great speech, I thought. But tactical error was I left 15 minutes for rebuttal. And they had all of me, splayed and filleted. I learned more in that meeting about the inner workings of Alcoholics Anonymous than I've learned before or since. Some of us were talking a little bit about coffee earlier. Some crack coffee or some kind of, anyway. You know, we're in the day of like really cool coffee. Let me tell you how they made coffee at this place. They had this thing that used to be a still. I'm not kidding. Had relief valves and all this stuff. And they're 2 weeks sober. I'm still bleeding. Okay? They said, kid, and two of them come up to you, put their arm around you. Beware. They're fixing to have a group conscience on you. We've decided, their words, we've decided you'd make a great coffee maker. And I thought, you're kidding me. No, man, we've prayed and meditated on this. It's your calling. So they showed me the still. They had a viscosity test that involved a Dixie cup spoon. If it did not stand in the coffee for 1 full second before it fell over, it wasn't done. And they would drink this stuff and make all kind of faces, just soured up, and almost have the big one. And they'd say, that's great coffee. They learned the rule. If you complain about the coffee, guess who the coffee maker is? Yeah. I complained about the coffee after the meeting, of course. A little later on, one of them said, who's got gas in the car? I said, excuse me, I didn't hear him. And he said, "You'll do." I said, "I'll do what?" He said, "Look, they're having an area assembly. We haven't had a GSR since Kennedy. We'd like you to go down and tell them that the group's doing fine and ask them if you can help them in any way. And take Mike with you." I hated Mike. Mike was an idiot. Mike could sit in the closed meeting and say, "I'm Mike, I don't have a goddamn thing to say to you people." And he, like a broken record that way. So I took Mike to the area assembly, lost him right off. Said, I got a lot of busy, I'm writing here. Took my legal pad. If you're writing inventory on a spiral notebook, you're a revisionist. They didn't have spiral notebooks in the 30s and 40s. They had big chief tablets, legal pads. Be authentic if you're going to write an authentic inventory. Use the right tools. No erasing in AA. No pencils and erasing. The first thing you write is probably the truth. So no point in erasing it. This is going completely out the window. I got a buddy of mine that we just have this running battle about the fine points of inventory. That thing died like a duck. Well, let's skip the fine points of inventory. I'm giving you pearls, I'm just saying. I took my legal pad, and the opening note was, Alex read the Serenity Prayer at 7:06 p.m. to start the assembly. I just knew the group would want to hear these hard-hitting facts. After 3 days of madness and wonderfulness all at the same time, I ended up back in Worland and wanted to give them a report. They gave me 2 minutes, and I started with my hard-hitting headline. Alex read the Serenity Prayer at 7:04 p.m. And they said, "That's enough, let's have the real meeting." And I was some kind of pissed. But then I started to understand, I think one of the things that drove me into service in my heart and soul. And they came up to me afterwards. There's always 2 or 3 of them. They come to you and surround your ass. And they said, "We'll hear the report someday. What you fail to understand, Gary, is we sent you down there because we trust you. You know us all pretty well now. And you know what we would say about anything that comes up. We trust you to handle that business for us at that assembly and to let them know that we're upstanding and we're doing the deal. And by your example and by the fact that we trust you and sent you to do this, we're not going to get distracted by all that here in the group. We're going to remember that our job is to carry the message to the alcoholic who still suffers and nothing else. But we're a part of this thing. We're a part of a great whole. And so we ask you to do this. And besides, they have telephones nowadays. They called back and said, "How'd the kid do?" And one of the old timers at the assembly said, "Well, he didn't embarrass you too bad." And that's all they needed to know. And that's all they wanted to know. But we were represented. It took me a long time to understand the value of that. The value of that. So as events transpired, I ended up moving to Colorado in '86. I ended up getting involved in general service there. In 1993, they asked me to stand for delegate. I did, and I came out of the hat. So I was a Panel 43 delegate from Colorado, 93, 94. And then 10 years later, my name was up for regional trustee, Southwest Region, on the general service board, and I came out of the hat, so I was a trustee from 2003 to 2007. In the intervening years, my wife and I moved to Louisiana. We had a daughter down there in 1997, but we moved to a place where there was no Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I did everything that Chapter 7 suggests that we do. I checked with the cops, the preachers, anybody that might know something about alcoholism. And as it would turn out, I ended up getting 4 12-step calls from bartenders. These are professionals who are engaged in daily contact with alcoholics, it turns out. And they called me, and I would come down and 12-step and pitch these folks. And as circumstances would happen, 2 of them got sober. Now, this area of Louisiana I moved to, let me just say, the family trees don't fork a lot. Everybody's everybody's cousin. And but what happened in that town was, it was a little town of 3,500 people, 8 bars, and they'd never had an AA group in that town. And I appreciate that we're out in Mongolia, you know, helping those folks and doing all this stuff. But right here in our backyard, folks, we've got communities all over the country that do not have or have ever had Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I started this little group with these 2 renegades, and we made it our business to 12-step anybody and everybody that would want to hear anything about us. And that group in that little town flourished and grew to about 40 people. And I didn't give them the option. When it was district meeting night, we'd load up in 3 or 4 cars, and we'd all go to the district meeting. They're not very quick there. It took them 3 of these adventures. One of them finally said, "We see that other groups are only sending 1. So, well, we can have an election." And they said, "Can we do that?" And I said, "Yeah, everybody's here." So on the steps of the district meeting place, we elected Dexter as the group GSR. And when he came back the next time to give a little report, we stopped the meeting and we heard Dexter's report. And Dexter didn't talk about what the CPC committee was doing. He didn't talk about H&I, didn't talk about treatment, didn't talk about the delegates report, didn't talk about any of that. He talked about the fact that this little scab town in southwestern Louisiana was on the AA map, and that for the first time in his life, he felt like he was a part of something that was so far greater than he could have ever hoped or dreamed, and that he believed that all of us in that little group were there, and we were all a part of this thing. And I got to tell you, I'm a hard guy, and I know I don't quit nothing easy. But there wasn't anybody in that room that wasn't crying like a baby. And I'm telling you, there is no thrill in life like finding out you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing, and that you're a part of something that God intends to be here forever, forever. And that you, individually, and with your sponsees and your sponsor, and you with your group, and you who do not feel you are qualified to do this, are just another liar sitting with liars, learning how to tell the truth to one another. And there is nothing like it. It's the greatest joy that I've ever experienced, watching these people get a little better, get a little better, get a little better every day. I have had so many experiences. There's no way in an hour and change that I could ever possibly share them with you. But I want to close with a little story about one of the consequences of my service at the General Service Board level. And I would tell you this, that the greatest part of that was being able to get out in the trenches and see how you guys are doing it. And the worst part of it was going to New York every time I turned around. I'm telling you. And I was very proud of some of the things that we accomplished as a board during that 4 years. But I was very sad about some things that we did. I think we did some harmful, wrong things in the interest of the furtherance of Alcoholics Anonymous. But one of the side adventures that I got to participate in was I liked to go see the groups. And so my buddy, who was a delegate from southeastern Missouri, he called me and he said, "How'd you like to go spend 3 or 4 days with the groups? Let's just check up on them and see how they're doing and before the assembly." And I said, "That'd be great." So we went on this whistle stop tour. I found an old folder jacket and I stuck some flyers in it. And we drop in on these groups, 2 or 3 people sitting in an old schoolhouse someplace, or one group was meeting in the lobby of a filling station. A little bitty towns, 80, 100 people everywhere down in there. And I dropped the folder on the table and I'd say, "I'm from headquarters and we've got some incident reports here that we need to adjust." And it's amazing how we are. They'd look at each other and say, Fred, I told you we shouldn't have got involved in that. You know, they'd fess up to stuff. And we were just having way too much fun, way too much fun. Well, one of the stops, we stopped in a little town, and this guy had invited us to come by. And so I met Mr. Leon, and we went down into his basement, which was a shrine to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he went over to an old file cabinet, and he pulled out a letter written by Bill Wilson in November 1950 to him, and it said, Mr. Leon, it was a privilege meeting you at the International Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous in Cleveland. I want to thank you for starting the Alcoholics Anonymous movement in the boot heel of of Missouri in 1942. And it is my hope that one day a trustee from the General Service Board will be able to come see you and express our collective thanks for your labor, your love, and your sacrifice in the furtherance of Alcoholics Anonymous. Ever, Bill Wilson. He looked up at me, tears running down his face. He said, it's about time. Mr. Leon had been to every international convention since Cleveland, and he missed the 2005 deal in Toronto. And sadly, he passed before the 2010. But I don't know. I know this, that nobody speaks for Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. No one of us. Everything I've said here tonight is my own personal feeling and thought, experience, hope, if you will, on aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I felt compelled to write him a letter in response, and so I did on General Service Board letterhead, and the contents of which, paraphrased, are, on behalf of alcoholics everywhere, I want to thank you, Mr. Leon, for your labor, your love, and your sacrifice. It was a pleasure meeting you. I hope to see you on the trail. And signed it as a trustee on the General Service Board. And I did it because I believe by this time you guys trusted me to do the right thing. And so that's what I did. And so I say to you tonight, in closing, I want to thank you each and every one of you for your labor, your love, your sacrifice, and your dedication to the furtherance of Alcoholics Anonymous. God bless you.